Hey, welcome to the BuckeyeGrove.com Rapid Reaction Podcast. We are sitting here at Ohio Stadium right now after a 42-0 Ohio State win over the Bearcats of Cincinnati. I'm, of course, joined by our fabulous interns, Keaton Maisano and Braden Moles. And, without further ado, we're going to just jump right into it. Let's skip all the pleasantries to start it. Initial thoughts from the game. I mean, there was a lot to take there, and I think it's even going to take a little bit more time beyond the rapid reaction to unpack everything that we saw. But Keaton, what are your first thoughts?
My first thoughts were that Justin Fields really looked composed back there today, making good decisions. I think last game you got to see the talent, but I don't think he was forced to kind of sit back there, go through his reads. Specifically, I mentioned the touchdown on one of the first touchdowns that he rushed in, and he went through all of his reads. He didn't take off, realized no one was open, and then he just used the magic of his legs, which only a few players in this country have. So that's the first thing I noticed. And then the other thing would be players making plays outside of the role that we see them in. Chase Young making the blocked field goal, and J.K. Dobbins making a great block on a touchdown run by Justin Fields. So just guys making impacts in different ways than we're used to.
And I agree. I mean, offensively, this team looks much improved. Not to say that they had a bad game last week by any means, putting up 28 points in the first 8 minutes, but the offense looked a lot more cohesive this week. I mean, you had 8 people catching a pass from Fields this week, KJ Hill with 8 catches for himself. So everything just looked a lot more cohesive with the offense this week. They didn't experience any of those offensive lulls that they had last week. I mean, you may have had the occasional punt from Drew Crispin, but other than that, I mean, there really was a lot of positives to take away from the offense this week.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed was that the reliance on the tight end was not there in this game. There were no completions to tight ends unless they snuck one in when I wasn't looking. KJ Hill, I mean, you mentioned had a very good game. He was kind of silent in the opening game. Talked to a couple of people who said that he was a little disappointed at that point. But I think a lot of guys had a lot to prove out there, and then they proved it. And while Ohio State didn't necessarily just roll in this game, they did put up 21 points in the second quarter, but they were consistent. It was, I think, it was a much more representative view of what we're going to see out of this team. 28 points in 9 minutes. Probably not realistic. Maybe against Miami of Ohio in Week 4, but probably not really realistic this season. But let's jump into the defense. I mean, obviously, when you hang a goose egg on your opponent, that means something. Keaton, what were your thoughts on the defense?
The defensive line showed flashes all game, and I think the consistency, kind of how you touched on, just putting together a complete performance. And I think it was really embodied with that fumble at the end of the game. I mean, that game's over, the win's sealed. But just getting that shutout kind of, as Ryan Day said, it kind of just showed the spirit of this team, and it just showed that they're going to fight till the end and they have a backbone. So I think that was kind of a good representation of how this defense, like last week, they weren't able to put together a full performance. The fourth quarter kind of slipped away from them when the backups came in. But even the backups today, they showed out. The defensive line and the linebacker core showed speed and strength, and that's going to help the Buckeyes going forward.
So obviously the defense had an incredible performance today with the shutout, but specifically, and you're going to get tired of us saying this, Chase Young had himself a game today. 1.5 sacks, 3 tackles, a blocked field goal, the 6th multi-sack game of his career. I mean, he's just a dominant presence on the field, and I think it's only going to go up from him. I mean, he had a bit of an easy path today with the redshirt freshman left tackle playing for Cincinnati, but just a dominant player.
Right. I think when you also look at this, Ohio State didn't have as many tackles for loss. It was 7 versus 12 against FAU, but the sacks were up. I think they were just much more active in certain ways. I think that some of it just really was more of a way of how Cincinnati tried to attack them. Cincinnati had a couple of plays that were big plays, but they weren't able to amount a lot out of them. The Buckeyes really kind of just kept Cincinnati in front of them and really stymied for most of the game. They knocked the starting quarterback out for a series, and then he ended up coming back, and then they ended up pulling him late in the game. It was a long day for anybody involved who was wearing the white uniforms in this game, because Ohio State defense really came to play. Jumping to offense as well, J.K. Dobbins, I think a lot of people were very critical of Game 1, said it looked a lot like what we saw in 2018. Maybe, not as fast, not as explosive. Where's the home run? Well, we saw that in this game. I mean, he definitely put up some numbers.
I think he just put together a complete game. He showed everything in his repertoire today. With the big run, obviously, it's going to get all the attention. But just even, getting up a bunch of yards, 5 yards a play or 7 yards a play, and being able to be the every down back. And then he had that huge block that doesn't show up in the stat sheet, but Fields gets a touchdown and he blows up a guy and Fields just walks in. Dobbins is showing his leadership. He's able to make plays, and even he said after the game he's graded his performance as just okay. So he's going to keep driving. He's never going to be complacent. He's going to continue to improve his game, and that'll really help the Buckeyes going forward.
I don't know if you want to say, excuse me, I don't know if you want to say, yeah, that J.K. Dobbins is back. I mean, this is one very positive performance for him, and obviously a lot to take from moving forward. 8.3 yards per carry, 144 yards. Obviously a very impressive game for him, but I would like to see a little more going forward. Not to say that he had a bad game today, but moving forward, I'd like to see some more consistency from him before we can fully determine whether or not he is back to, the way he was in his freshman year.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because you take that 60-yard run away and then these 16 carries for 81 yards, probably not the greatest average right there, but I think that there was an opportunity too, because they brought in Master Teague for 11 carries and they had DeMario run 5 times. I think that if they needed more out of J.K. Dobbins, I think that they could have definitely gotten more out of him. The 17 carries, very much in line with what we'd seen in last year in terms of what his load was when he was splitting carries with Mike Weber. We will, once they get into Big Ten season, I really do believe we'll see him consistently in those mid-20s and whatnot. But it was a good day's work, and they really didn't have to overtax him, in my opinion. We'll jump ahead to some other things here on the other side of this quick break, but we want to thank one of our big sponsors for being a part of this podcast and bringing it to everybody. Egg Water Conditioning has been treating well in city water in Central Ohio with American-made water filtration products for over 60 years. Have a water quality problem? The water treatment experts at Hague know how to solve it. Not sure if your water softener is working? They will test, inspect, and sanitize any brand of water softener for only $20. Schedule a system checkup or water test today by calling 614-836-2195 or visit them online at HagueH2O.com. That's HAGUE H2O.com. Yeah, that always awkward toss to yourself in a recorded commercial, but the guys at Hague are great. I'm a customer with them as well, so I can speak from firsthand that they do good work. But back to the game that we saw. I'm going to ask a question to you guys, and I want your honest answer on this. Has this team really been tested? I mean, they start with Florida Atlantic, and then they play Cincinnati. I think that, there were some nervous Nellies out there that thought this game might be a little bit closer than what anybody would have been comfortable with. They were proven wrong in there, but how much has this team been tested?
I think they've been tested with a good Cincinnati team, had a strong defense. Offensively, they got some playmakers, but they haven't faced the adversity that you need to face when you are trying to become a championship team. That'll come later down the road, but you can only handle what's in front of you, and I think they've done that very well, and they handled a Cincinnati team that is not 42 points worse than a team like Ohio State. Ohio State just came out with a good game plan, played very well, and Cincinnati's a very good team, and you'll see that going forward as they continue to play other opponents.
And Ohio State certainly handled Florida Atlantic and Cincinnati very well. I don't know if they have been tested the way that we would like to see, or if even Ryan Day would like to see it. I mean, I think it'll be a few more weeks before they really face. Obviously, Nebraska is maybe trending down a bit since we did our preseason podcast, but I think that'll be one of the first real challenges for them going into that big environment in Nebraska. But you'd like to see a little more challenge from the opposing offense to the defense, really get some good players in there that are going to test the defense before you can start, looking forward and seeing how they're going to do the rest of the season.
Right, Ohio State doesn't have a Power 5 out-of-conference opponent on this schedule. That really was because of the TCU situation and them doing the one game down at Jerry World in Dallas and not having that game on this schedule. But I think, with a young team that's trying to reinvent itself in certain ways and whatnot, with a first-year head coach and a first-year starting quarterback, it's not the worst thing in the world. But yeah, I think the level of difficulty is going to get a little bit tougher. I mean, we'll talk about their next opponent here in a second, but and once they get into Big Ten play, I think that there are going to be a lot of surprises. Teams that we were talking about being great, as Braden talked about with Nebraska. No, the book hasn't been written on them. I think that there have been some teams that we were kind of writing off that were that are performing very well, but you have to kind of put into consideration as well who it is that they're playing. So. We're recording this while Big Ten play is still going on. We don't have all the finals in front of us. We're not going to get into heavy specifics, but what have you noticed around the Big Ten so far here? 1+ weeks into the schedule, Keaton.
Maryland's offense is definitely what I've noticed. I mean, the numbers are eye-popping. looks more like the Terrapins basketball team than it does their football team, putting up 79 and then 63 against the 21st ranked team in the country in Syracuse, and probably the second best team in the conference, the ACC conference. So the offense for Maryland really pops out. I mean, 11 for 15 on third downs today and put up 650 total yards. So that's just eye-popping to me.
And so, I mean, one of the bigger games that took place earlier today was Army taking on that team up north, and it was certainly an interesting game to watch from the perspective of that team up north. I mean, you have a team that going into the game is only going to run the ball, with the exception of a couple of passing attempts, one of which was actually picked off. But you'd like to see them win that by a little more. Going into the game knowing what they're going to do, you'd like to see them have a better game plan for that. But moving forward, wouldn't be surprised if they drop in the rankings a little bit this week. But moving forward, we'll see how they handle stuff.
A couple of other early games. Purdue was a 42-24 winner over Vanderbilt, team from the mighty SEC. Granted, it's Vanderbilt, and Iowa shut out Rutgers in a league game 30-0. I think everybody who was very excited about what Rutgers had done in week one was brought crashing back down to earth, that Rutgers is still Rutgers. So Ohio State goes into league play starting next week. They travel to Bloomington to take on the Indiana Hoosiers. Ohio State definitely owns that series. We're not going to really get into any serious X's and O's at this point. It's not worth it. We'll have plenty of coverage over at BuckeyeGrove.com. But Keaton, what are your thoughts about Ohio State going into league play and most importantly, starting that that first road game?
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. It's just the intrigue of the first road game, because we've seen Fields and we've seen some of the younger players performing in front of friendly fans, but once you step out of there, I mean, Indiana, you'll probably have a lot of Ohio State fans out there too, but just a change in scenery can mess with the team and just see how they can respond there. I mean, Indiana opening up Big Ten play also adds another nugget to that whole game, but I think it'll be another test and just another step in the maturation of this team.
Like Keaton said, I think this will be a big step for the team, seeing how they perform on the road. So Justin Fields has actually, in his career at Georgia, he has not thrown a pass in an away game environment. So it'll be interesting to see how he responds for the first time, really getting some playing time on the road. And I think not just him, but a lot of the younger players on the team, seeing how they react to that road environment.
I was trying to look up something really quick on my phone, and I didn't have time, but I if I remember right, Ohio State's first road game under Urban Meyer, I think, and I don't know if it was the first one, but the first time they went to Indiana was that crazy shootout that ended up resulting in Zach Boren going from fullback to linebacker, and Ohio State had no problem scoring points, but they just certainly couldn't put the Hoosiers away. It was a wild game to cover, and I'm sure one that Ohio State fans do not want to see a repeat of. Ohio State and Indiana will play next week at noon, and that game will be on Fox. So for Braden and for Keaton, I'm Kevin Noon, your host here at the Rapid Reaction Podcast. I had to think about the name of it. We still haven't come up with a better name for it. I think we're stuck with this name until something else happens. And that's about it. Keep coming on to BuckeyeGrove.com. Tell your friends we have a great promo going on, and talk to you next week.